You're probably wondering why my title is what it is, and that's because it's totally clickbait. Well, almost. I mean, it worked if you're hearing me explain this all right now, but I also promised you that I will justify the title later on. This video is primarily a response to the problem of evil. Broadly speaking, the problem of evil has been a huge issue for believers in God and has been the reason many people have lost their faith. It's a very simple but also very compelling argument claiming that God doesn't exist. Now, don't worry, you haven't heard of the problem of evil before. I'll explain. It's really not that complicated, and I'm almost positive that you've thought of this before, but just haven't addressed it by a formal name. So, the problem of evil has a few premises before we can arrive at our conclusion that God doesn't exist. So first, if God is all good, he would desire for there to be no evil. Second, if God is all-knowing, he would know about all evil. Third, if God is all-powerful, he could stop all evil. But there is evil in this world. Therefore, there is no God. Basically, if God really was all we think he is, he would and should be able to stop all evil. But he doesn't. So he probably doesn't exist. And that's pretty much the problem of evil. So for people who believe in God, they generally go about answering this argument by saying that some evils are necessary because they allow for the possibility of some greater good. That's the point I want you to remember here. The way by which I'll be justifying the existence of evil is by showing that it's necessary for a greater good. So the very famous example of this is the example of free will. God allows for moral evils like robbing and raping and murder, those evils between human to human. He allows for those because there is a greater good of allowing us to have free will. With our free will, we can choose to hate and be bitter and mean and resent others, or we can choose to love others and treat them with kindness. That's only if we have the freedom to choose between the two. Now, I think most skeptics and atheists would agree with this example. It seems obvious that while we do have to deal with this evil, there's a greater good. But I think the real problem lies in the more disgusting evils. Like, why did God create a world with disease and hunger and all these evils that just seem unnecessary? Now, I want to talk about one of these evils. And as you may have picked up from the title, I want to talk about innocent suffering, that evil. Not why is there disease or murder, but rather, why did these evils have to also affect the innocent? That's what I want to focus on in this video. So imagine if Hitler had gotten cancer in 1940. I think people would be praising the Lord for his divine justice. But I'm also pretty sure you've watched a St. Jude's ad and seen the horrible suffering that those children have to go through at such a young age when they certainly don't deserve it. There's a big difference there. You see, the difference is simply the innocence. The idea of a child suffering takes a hold on our hearts, unlike the idea of a serial killer suffering. The difference is that descriptor, that added note of the suffering person being a child or a baby, someone innocent. That's why when atheists start to justify their lack of belief in God, they generally turn to examples like, why do children have cancer? Why do they have to suffer through things like this? What good God would create a world where they have to suffer? And to be honest, that argument is very compelling. If you are a believer, it has this certain sting to it. It really makes you start probing and questioning the goodness of God. Sometimes I start thinking, well, God created everything. So in some ways, he created children who will have cancer simply by merit of their genetics. It's not anything they did, it's just the way they were born. I feel like I usually end this train of thought pointing the finger at God, and this is where my doubt begins. So in response to those doubts that I've had, and I'm sure other people have had, I started to think and I've come up with an argument that I like, and I think it's convincing. So let me begin. I started thinking about the argument that atheists use most commonly. They almost always rely on this image of a frail, sick child laying in a hospital bed, suffering from some horrific cancer that is slowly eating away at their body. And this example is particularly provocative, and I started to wonder why. Well, this example can actually be thought of as two individual and distinct evils. First, why does cancer even exist? That's one evil. And second, why do innocent people have to suffer? That second evil, that's what this video is primarily about, and that's where I found most of my doubt stemming from. So I started to think about a world where innocent people don't suffer. What would that be like? All those babies and children, they just don't suffer. Imagine if God granted that wish. Imagine if God simply said, innocent people will no longer suffer. Imagine that's the world we live in. So I started drawing conclusions about a world like that. And I've realized it's actually a worse world. To be honest, I can't believe that I even just said that. A world without babies suffering is a worse world? Really? Well, you might just dismiss me right now and click off this video, but please don't. Just please bear with me, I'll explain, I promise. So back to the argument now. So if God exists, and that's besides the point right now, if he exists, I'm presuming that God wants a relationship with us. I also think he wants that relationship with us to be freely chosen. A relationship where we aren't compelled to love him or choose him. One where we choose him freely, based entirely on our love for him. To be honest, that's the relationship we all want. We don't want our spouse to be with us because they feel forced. No, we want our spouse to be with us because they actually love us and chose us. I think that makes sense, and I think most people will agree with me here. But in a world where innocent people don't suffer, there's a compulsion, there's an incentive to become innocent and stay innocent. People will want to be innocent so that they don't have to suffer. So how do people become innocent? That's a pressing question all of a sudden. Well, they become innocent by following the moral code. Of course, I mean God's law. Following God would be the only way to remain innocent. It would be evident to us what the moral code is based on who suffers and who doesn't. There wouldn't be any gray area. It would simply be black and white. And let's be honest, everyone would want to be innocent because no one wants to suffer. In this way, you would be forced into a relationship with God. You see, you're forced into obeying his laws, God's laws. That means no murdering, no stealing, no adultery. You would be having this semi-real relationship in which you follow everything he says, but you don't follow it for the right reasons. You don't follow it because you actually love him. No. You're following him because you fear suffering. An analogy of a father and son might work best to convince you here. Does the son listen to the rules of the house because he fears his father and he fears the beating, the suffering? Or does the son listen to the rules of the house because he loves his father and trusts in his advice? Those are two vastly different relationships, although the son still listens to the rules of the house either way. Now, you tell me which one is filled with love, which relationship is actually deep and meaningful. Which one would you want? I mean, you're still following the rules of the house either way, but one of them is because you fear suffering, and one of them is because you love your father. Think about your own relationships, mothers and fathers, spouses and friends. Would you want the governing principle of your relationship to be fear? Fear of suffering? And really think about it. If staying innocent meant you didn't have to suffer, I mean you didn't have to feel pain, I don't think anyone would ever willingly open themselves up to suffering when they are guaranteed no suffering if they kept following God's law. you can see how this becomes a restraint on our free will. But God wants us to choose Him freely and with love, not because we fear suffering or because we fear the beaten. In a world where the innocent don't suffer, everyone would want to follow God because they fear suffering and not because they actually love Him. No one would really have a free and loving relationship with God because we would all be doing it, basically, because we fear suffering. You think God wants all of these people following His every word because they fear suffering or because they actually love Him? All of us would be following God's law to the letter, but none of us would have a real relationship with Him because there would always be that undertone there, that undertone of, if I break a law, if I become guilty in any way, if I'm not innocent, He's going to punish me. There's suffering there. So I'll follow Him just because I don't want to suffer. Is that a real relationship? That is not how I imagine our relationship with the divine is supposed to be. All of these people on earth paralyzed into submission because they're afraid of the suffering that might befall them if they don't follow the law perfectly. Tell me where the deep, meaningful, and beautiful relationship is to be found there. Sure, in a world like that, there's less suffering, and that's great, but at what cost? God could never call us true believers, and we can never say we actually loved Him. So yes, a world like ours, with innocent babies suffering, is better, because the alternative is so much worse. We have everything to lose and nothing to gain. That's why there must be suffering, innocent suffering in this world. Otherwise, the alternative, with no innocent suffering, while it does sound so appealing, and it sounds beautiful, it sounds better than this world, a world like that is actually worse, because there can be no relationship with the divine. God wouldn't know us, and we wouldn't know God, because there would always be that hint, that compulsion driving the relationship. The only reason I'm really following your law, the only reason I'm really going to Mass, the only reason I'm not cheating on my wife, it's not because I love her or because I love God and I love the beauty of His moral code. No, it's because I fear suffering. So that's the basic idea of the argument, that in a world where innocent people don't suffer, there would be a general compulsion, this incentive to stay innocent and force a relationship with God. But of course, that forced relationship wouldn't be real, it wouldn't be deep, and it certainly wouldn't be based on love. It would simply be based on that fear of suffering. Now that's the basic idea. I hope you can grasp that, and I hope I put it in such a way that's at least somewhat intelligible. And please note, I'm not saying that a world with more innocent suffering is better, because obviously it's not. Rather, I'm saying that the potential for innocent suffering, living in a world like that, is better than living in a world without it, because the alternative, as I hopefully convinced you of throughout this video, is so much worse. Now, that's my argument. I hope it was short, sweet, and concise. For me, this argument really helped me take the sting out of the most compelling atheistic arguments. Those arguments can evoke such passionate feelings when they talk about children and all the evils that they have to endure. It can really make you doubt, but I really do hope, this argument shows you what I meant by the title, that innocent suffering doesn't matter, only in respect to the problem of evil. Of course it matters. And of course I didn't mean that by the title. Now, if anyone has any objections, please, I'll listen to them in the comment section. Or maybe if you know any YouTubers that would like to respond to this, please send them this. I know I'm a small channel, but that's besides the point. I really do want to know the truth. This is also the start of a short series I'm going to be trying. I'll be thinking about all the evils that there are and trying to come up with objections. That means I want to talk about free will a lot, and moral evils, hunger, starvation, and even disease and natural disasters. But anyways, I'm droning on. So I thank you for listening to this, and please, if you have any objections, please put them in the comment section and I'll try to answer them. I hope, I really do hope, maybe this argument adds just 1% to your conversion. Maybe it makes you believe in theism just 1% more. Anyways, have a blessed day, and thank you for watching.